Hello and welcome, I'm Austin Koblarczyk, composer and arranger, bringing you episode 19 of my book review series. Today's book is a little different than usual, in that it's not about music or music-related topics per se. Today's book, The Poetry Home Repair Manual by Ted Kooser. Now, Ted Kooser is a very, and I mean very, accomplished poet. He was the Poet Laureate of the United States for a few years. He has an honorary doctorate in poetry. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 2005. I could spend the next 10 minutes listing off his many, many accolades and accomplishments. But that's not why you're here. Because his most important accomplishment for this video is that he wrote this book, which he did while he was Poet Laureate. Fun fact. So you might be wondering, Austin, why are you discussing a poetry book? Your book review series is about music books and books related to music. And you're kind of right. Most of the time, I like to keep to my little niche over here in the corner and stay quiet with my 91, 93 subscribers and my self-justification for buying all these books. But I'll posit a little argument, viewer who is clearly being used as a straw man for this bit. This is a music book. This book right here that says Poetry Home Repair Manual, music book. This poetry book, which mentions music probably less than 10 times. This is a music book. Austin, I can hear you asking, what the hell are you talking about? Just keep listening. As a composer, poetry can be your everything. For a composer of vocal music, it is quite literally almost your everything. It's your bread and butter. It's the whole being of some of your music. Even for composers of primarily instrumental music or electronic music or whatever the hell the kids do these days.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Poetry can be everything. It can be inspiration. There's no limit to what you can draw inspiration from as a composer and writer. As a musician in general, poetry can get you closer to your music. For a vocalist, and this is coming from someone who has had approximately 1 semester of vocal lessons, knowing your poetry on a deeper level can help you connect to it better, which, by God, does that help you memorize. As any other kind of musician, understanding poetry can help you understand the inherent musicality of life, of writing, of so many other things. But I'll get off my little soapbox, and we'll stop this bit for a minute, so we can actually discuss the book that we're here to talk about. The book itself is made up of 12 chapters and a short introduction that describes the book. The book bills itself as a self-teaching tool for beginner poets. It's not so much about the content of your poetry, but rather the craft of careful writing and meticulous revision, as it's put. It outlines Kooser's philosophy of poetry, discussing how important he thinks it is to view poetry as a form of communication, rather than some type of self-justifying or self-serving act. Chapter 1, A Poet's Job Description, discusses how Kooser views the idea of being a poet. He starts out with a demonstration where he says, there's an essential difference between being a poet and writing poetry. There are, in a sense, two poets. One alone writing a poem, and the one in a black turtleneck and beret trying to look sexy. I have no clue which one of these I am. He also tells this fun story about a guy he once met, who he's talking to about throwing horseshoes. And this guy told Kooser that his uncle had been a 3-state horseshoe throwing champion for several years. And this guy had once asked his uncle, how'd you get so good at throwing horseshoes? And his uncle says, son, you gotta pitch 100 shoes a day. I just assumed that there was some kind of accent in this. I don't actually know. He didn't say anything about the guy. And Kooser relates this as advice, you know? You just gotta keep doing whatever you're doing, and doing it over, and over, and probably over. Chapter 2 is called Writing for Others. And here Kooser talks a bit about building a hypothetical audience for you to consider while you're writing. He describes how this hypothetical audience can be used as a tool to judge your own work from a different point of view than your own, assuming you can kind of mentalize that enough. Chapter 3, First Impressions, this might shock you, discusses how to make a first impression, and talks about first impressions. And it's also fairly important how to control those first impressions, how to get across to a reader at the first glance what you're trying to get across. Don't Worry About Rules is the title of Chapter 4, and it's a bit of a misleading title. I think the real message Kooser is trying to pass off in this one is to not apply outside rules to your work too much when they're not beneficial, but to follow your own rule set and stay consistent with your own work. Chapter 5 is Rhyming, Ham Cubes, Prose Poems. My only notes on this chapter read, make soup, question mark. Must have been hungry. This chapter is really about form, in my opinion. How poetry can be fitted into a form, written around a form, or fall into a form by accident. The ham cubes thing comes up as a part of a story that Kooser tells to try to make an analogy. But I read this right before dinner a few days ago, so the soup part just got a little distracting when I was trying to read. Chapter 6, Writing About Feelings. Now, if you've read any modern poetry, you might have read something you didn't enjoy very much because it was overly gushy, overly sentimental, and kind of self-indulgent. I know I have, looking at you, every girl on Instagram. Kooser here discusses how hard it can be to put just the right amount of feeling into your poems without coming across as gushy or overly sentimental, and how to kind of balance on that needle tip between falling a little short so that it doesn't connect, and sounding like the first attempts of a teenager going through their first bad breakup. Chapter 7 is Can You Read Your Poem Through Your Poem? The chapter deals mostly with immersion and not breaking it. But it discusses some techniques and a bit about cost-benefit analysis on when it is useful to use those techniques. Things such as constant lowercase letters, famous from the work of E. E. Cummings, and how that can be useful once in a while. Chapter 8, Writing from Memory. I did not take any notes in this chapter, so I'm playing a prank on myself. Congratulations me, I won again. This chapter discusses how powerful memory can be as a tool, genuine memory, how the simplest memory can come alive, and your poem can take on a new life without you even noticing it. What you might start writing about might gradually become something different as you focus on the memory and understand what's the true focus of that scene. Chapter 9, Working with Detail. There's a section in this chapter where he discusses details in a poem, and how the seemingly innocuous and unique ones are what make a poem seem real, rather than obviously a fake, hypothetical situation. How avoiding useful cliched details can be useful in a poem as well, to kind of avoid that same impression of being fake, hypothetical. Chapter 10 is called Controlling Effects Through Careful Choices, and it talks about how a poet can create specific imagery through careful word choice, but also how a poet can come across as condescending or belittling when their word choice is a little too precise in some places and not enough so in others, specifically in the realm of things that should be obvious being a little too precise. Chapter 11, Fine-Tuning Metaphors and Similes, is about doing just that. Shocker. Understanding the difference between the two, when one is more appropriate than the other, and how to figure that out, when it's okay. It's all key talking points in this section. Chapter 12, Relax and Wait. In the final chapter, Kooser gives the most important advice, in my opinion, is that when you are finished writing, take a step back, let it sit. Let it rest. Let it fade from your mind a bit, and come back to it in a little while. When you come back to it, you'll have a whole new perspective. You can begin editing and reworking right away, and then do the whole cycle again. Leave it to be, edit, rework, that kind of concept. Art takes time. But this isn't also just advice to stop writing during that time. It's advice to go on, do more projects, start new poems, keep moving forward, and as you come back to older stuff, you'll have gradually gained more experience and understand things better. Throughout the book, though I haven't been mentioning it, Kooser includes a number of poems, both from himself and many other poets, to serve as examples or to highlight a point that he makes. There's some interesting reads in here, and some exercises that seem useful, though I haven't been able to try them out yet. As always, before the end, in my opinion, availability. This is very available. You can find copies of this on the internet from like $3.50 to like $20. There, it's all over the place. Amazon, used book websites. You know, heck, I found this one at my library, in my college library, so I'd be shocked if other libraries like didn't have this. Go take a look. Just take a look around. You'll find it eventually. Honestly, $4. It's a cool read for $4. That being said, this book was a nice read. It comes across in a very patient and understanding writing tone, and it feels like it's coming from someone who really cares about what they're talking about, especially teaching, which in this case is teaching and helping others write poetry. A fitting tone for a poet laureate of the United States, I'd say. I really enjoyed this read, and I look forward to polishing my poetry for use in my compositions. Now, if you've read the book, are planning on it, or you have something you want to say about poetry or Ted Kooser, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. As usual, there are more and more book reviews and other videos on my channel, so feel free to check those out if you enjoyed this one, or just feel free to stick around for the next book review episode by leaving a subscribe, a like, or whatever kind of thing to get my content into your algorithm. So, yeah, that's all. Thanks. I'll see you next time.